I never imagined my life could take such an unexpected turn. I, Sarah, always considered myself a person of integrity, loyal and dedicated to my family. But life has a cruel way of testing us, of making us question everything we believe in. My marriage to Mark seemed perfect in everyone's eyes. 10 years together, a beautiful 6-year-old daughter, Emily, our little princess. We had a comfortable house, stable jobs, and an enviable circle of friends. But behind this facade of happiness, something had been broken for a long time. Loneliness silently crept in, like an intruder hiding in the shadows. At first, it was small things: silent dinners, superficial conversations, increasingly rare touches. Mark and I became masters at pretending everything was fine, especially in front of Emily. But at night, lying beside him, I felt lonelier than ever. I tried to ignore this feeling for years, focusing on being the best mother possible for Emily and dedicating myself to work. But the dissatisfaction grew, fueled by unresolved resentments and communication that had long since broken down. I loved Mark, or at least I thought I did, but I couldn't reach him anymore. It was on a particularly difficult night, after an argument about something as trivial as dishes in the sink, that I found the courage to suggest couples therapy. To my surprise, Mark agreed almost immediately. Maybe he also felt we were losing each other. Dr. Anderson was recommended to us by a friend. He had an excellent reputation as a couples therapist, and from the first session, I understood why. There was something about his presence that inspired confidence. His brown eyes conveyed a deep understanding, as if he could see beyond the words we were saying. The first sessions were difficult. Years of repressed hurts and frustrations came to the surface. Mark and I confronted each other, exposing our deepest wounds. Dr. Anderson guided us masterfully, helping us navigate that turbulent sea of emotions. But something unexpected began to happen. With each session, I found myself anxious to return to the office. Not for the therapy itself, but for Dr. Anderson's comforting presence. His deep, calm voice had a soothing effect on me. I started noticing small details. The way he ran his hand through his greying hair when he was thoughtful, the warm smile with which he greeted us, the sparkle in his eyes when he made an insightful observation. I tried to push these thoughts away, convincing myself it was just gratitude for his work. But deep down, I knew I was fooling myself. The connection I felt with Dr. Anderson went beyond professional. It was a rapport I hadn't experienced in a long time, not even with Mark. Weeks passed, and therapy seemed to be helping our marriage. Mark and I were communicating better, making efforts to reconnect. But while our relationship apparently improved, my feelings for Dr. Anderson grew frighteningly. It was during an individual session that everything changed. Mark couldn't attend due to a work commitment, and I found myself alone with Dr. Anderson for the first time. The tension in the air was palpable. We were talking about my fears and insecurities when suddenly the words simply stopped flowing. Our eyes met, and at that moment, the world seemed to stop. I don't know who made the first move, whether it was me or him. I only know that in an instant we were kissing, with an intensity that left me breathless. All ethical and moral barriers crumbled in that kiss. It was wrong, I knew that, but never had something wrong felt so right. We pulled away, breathless and confused. Dr. Anderson seemed as shaken as I was. "This can't happen," he said, but his voice betrayed the desire his eyes couldn't hide. I left the office that day feeling simultaneously elated and terrified. The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotions. Guilt consumed me every time I looked at Mark or Emily. How could I have betrayed not just my husband, but my entire family? At the same time, I couldn't stop thinking about Dr. Anderson, how his lips felt against mine, how his strong hands had held me. I tried to cancel the next sessions, but Mark insisted we continue. "We're making progress," he would say, not knowing that each word of his was like a knife in my heart. I returned to the office, determined to put an end to that madness before it was too late. But one look from Dr. Anderson was enough for all my determination to dissolve. The attraction between us was magnetic, impossible to resist. We met outside of sessions, always with the excuse of discussing my case. Each encounter was a mix of overwhelming passion and searing guilt. Our clandestine relationship intensified quickly. Dr. Anderson became my confidant, my lover, my escape from the reality I no longer wanted to face. With him, I felt alive again, desired, understood. It was as if he could see parts of me that had long been forgotten, even by myself. Meanwhile, at home, I became increasingly distant. Mark noticed the change, of course. How could he not? I was more distracted, sometimes more irritable, other times strangely happy. He asked if everything was okay, if therapy was helping. I lied, saying yes, that I was just processing a lot of things. Each lie was like a small cut in my soul. Emily, my sweet Emily, also felt the change in the air. She asked me why I was always on the phone, why Daddy and I didn't watch movies together on Friday nights anymore. Her innocent questions were the ones that hurt the most. How could I explain to her that her mother had become a person who barely recognized herself? Months passed in this dangerous dance of lies and forbidden passion. Each lie was like a small cut in my soul. Emily, my sweet Emily, also felt the change in the air. She asked me why I was always on the phone, why Daddy and I didn't watch movies together on Friday nights anymore. Her innocent questions were the ones that hurt the most. How could I explain to her that her mother had become a person who barely recognized herself? Months passed in this dangerous dance of lies and forbidden passion. Dr. Anderson and I would meet in hotels, distant parks, anywhere we could have a few moments together away from curious eyes. Each encounter was a mixture of ecstasy and torment. The physical and emotional pleasure we felt with each other was undeniable, but the weight of guilt became increasingly difficult to bear. There were moments when I thought about telling Mark everything, about ending that charade. But then I imagined the look of disappointment in his eyes, Emily's cry upon learning that her parents were going to separate, and my courage would fade. I was trapped in a web I had woven myself, unable to find a way out that wouldn't hurt someone I loved. Dr. Anderson was also struggling with his own demons. He knew he was violating all the ethical codes of his profession, risking his career and reputation. Several times he tried to end our affair, saying we needed to return to reality. But it took just one touch, one look, and we were back in each other's arms, as if the world out there didn't exist. It was on a rainy autumn afternoon that everything fell apart. Mark had left work early, deciding to surprise me. He arrived home expecting to find me preparing dinner, as I used to do at that time. But the house was empty. Worried, he called my cell phone. Once, twice, 3 times. No answer. It was then that he noticed my tablet on the living room table. Normally, I would never leave it there, always careful with my privacy. But that day, in my rush to leave to meet Anderson, I had been careless. Mark hesitated for a moment before picking up the tablet. He knew he was invading my privacy, but something in his gut told him he needed to do this. With trembling hands, he unlocked the screen. The messages were there, exposed like open wounds. Passionate conversations between me and Anderson, planning meetings, declarations of love, intimate details that left no doubt about the nature of our relationship. Mark read everything, each word cutting him like a sharp blade. When I got home, hours later, I found Mark sitting on the living room couch, the tablet in his hands, his face marked by tears that had already dried. One look was enough for me to know that he knew everything. "Why?" was all he managed to say, his voice choked with pain and disbelief. At that moment, all the excuses I had rehearsed in my mind, all the justifications I had tried to convince myself of, seemed empty and insignificant. I had no answer to that simple question. How to explain that I had betrayed not only my husband, but my own essence? The hours that followed were a blur of screams, tears, and accusations. Mark oscillated between anger and despair, demanding to know every sordid detail of my betrayal. I cried, begged for forgiveness, tried to explain the inexplicable. Emily, awakened by the screams, appeared at the living room door, her eyes wide with fear. Seeing her there, witnessing the destruction of her family, was the final blow. At that moment, the reality of what I had done hit me with full force. It wasn't just my marriage that I had destroyed, but the security and happiness of my daughter. Mark asked me to leave the house that same night. Between sobs, I hastily packed a bag, kissed Emily, who didn't understand what was happening, and left for my sister's house. The next few weeks were a nightmare. Mark refused to talk to me, except through lawyers. He wanted a divorce and full custody of Emily. I tried to contact Anderson, seeking some kind of comfort or guidance in that chaos, but he had disappeared. His office was closed, his cell phone turned off. Later, I discovered that he had hastily moved out of town, fleeing the scandal that would surely come when the news of our affair spread. I found myself alone, without a husband, without a lover, struggling to maintain some contact with my daughter. Friends and family distanced themselves, some openly condemning me, others simply uncomfortable with the situation. The loneliness I felt at the beginning of my marriage seemed like paradise compared to the isolation I now experienced. The months that followed were of intense self-reflection and regret. I went through individual therapy, this time with a female therapist, trying to understand what led me to commit such a mistake. I learned about my own destructive patterns, about the importance of honest communication, about the need to face problems instead of running away from them. The divorce process was painful and bitter. Mark, hurt beyond measure, fought to deprive me of any contact with Emily. It took months of mediation and legal agreements for me to have the right to supervise visits. Seeing my daughter only a few hours a week, always under the watchful eye of a social worker, was torture. But I knew I deserved that punishment. Slowly, very slowly, I began to rebuild my life. I got a new job, moved to a small apartment, made new friends who didn't know my past. But guilt and regret were constant companions. Every time I saw Emily, every time I noticed how she had grown or changed, I was reminded of the precious time I had lost, of the irreparable damage I had caused. Mark, over time, began to open up a little more. We weren't friends, probably never would be again, but we managed to maintain civil communication for Emily's sake. He even agreed to gradually increase my time with her, recognizing that, despite everything, I was still her mother. As for Anderson, I never saw or heard from him again. I learned through rumors that he had lost his license to practice therapy and was working in something completely different in another state. Sometimes, in my darkest moments, I wondered if he thought of me, if he felt the same regret I felt, but these questions had no answer, and with time, I learned to let them go. Years passed. Emily grew up, becoming an intelligent and compassionate teenager, despite the trauma of our separation. Mark found new love and remarried. And me? I remained alone, focused on being the best mother I could be in the moments I had with Emily, and on continuing my process of personal growth. There were times when I thought I had overcome everything, when I felt at peace with my past. But then something would happen. A wedding anniversary that no longer existed. An old photo found in a drawer, and all the emotions would come flooding back. I learned that forgiveness, especially self-forgiveness, is an ongoing process, not a final destination. On a sunny afternoon, when Emily was 16, she sought me out. We sat in a cafe, and she asked me the question I had feared for years. She wanted to know exactly what had happened to destroy our family. Looking into my daughter's eyes, so similar to mine, I decided she deserved the truth. With a heavy heart, I told her everything. The loneliness, the therapy, the affair with Anderson. I didn't try to justify myself or minimize my mistakes. Emily listened in silence, her eyes revealing a mixture of emotions that I could barely decipher. When I finished, I expected her anger, her judgment, but what I received was something much deeper and more painful. "Mum," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "I always knew there was more to the story. I spent years imagining what could have been so terrible to destroy our family. And now I understand. I don't approve of what you did, but I understand that people make mistakes, even huge ones." Her words, mature beyond her years, hit me like a wave. Tears streamed down my face as I absorbed the weight of her understanding. Emily continued. I saw how you struggled all these years to redeem yourself, to be a good mother even in the most difficult circumstances. And I saw how Dad suffered, but also how he managed to move forward. You both taught me a lot about resilience and forgiveness. At that moment, I felt as if a huge weight had been lifted from my shoulders. It wasn't complete forgiveness, that would take more time, but it was a start, a beginning of healing not just for me, but for our fragmented family. In the months that followed, I noticed a subtle change in our family dynamics. Mark seemed less tense when we met for matters related to Emily. My daughter, in turn, began to open up more, sharing not just the events of her life, but also her deeper thoughts and feelings. It was during this period that I received unexpected news. Anderson had returned to the city, not to resume his career as a therapist, that chapter of his life was definitely closed, but to make peace with his past. He contacted me, asking to talk. I hesitated for days, unsure if I should reopen that wound. But something inside me knew I needed this closure. I agreed to meet him in a public park, a neutral and open location. When I saw him, I was shocked by how much he had aged. The years hadn't been kind to Anderson. His hair, once just greying, was now completely white. Deep wrinkles marked his face, silent witnesses to years of guilt and regret. Our conversation was difficult, full of uncomfortable pauses and barely contained emotions. Anderson told me about his life after leaving the city, the temporary jobs, the depression, the sleepless nights tormented by what he had done. He had gone through his own journey of self-reflection and personal growth. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "I'm sorry for betraying your trust, for violating my professional ethics, for contributing to the destruction of your family. There are no excuses for what we did, but I want you to know that I carry this regret with me every day." Hearing his words was cathartic. For years, I had carried the weight of that guilt alone. Knowing that Anderson had also struggled with the consequences of our actions made me realize that I wasn't alone in my regret. "I'm sorry too," I replied. "We both made terrible mistakes, but we can't change the past. We can only learn from it and try to be better people from here on out." We parted that day with a hesitant handshake and unshed tears. We weren't friends, we never would be, but there was a mutual understanding, a silent acceptance of our shared mistakes. That meeting marked a turning point in my healing journey. I realized that while forgiveness from others was important, self-forgiveness was equally crucial. I had punished myself for years, carrying the weight of my guilt like a cross. It was time to start forgiving myself, not to forget what I had done, but to be able to move forward and be the person I knew I could be. With this new perspective, I approached Mark asking for a serious conversation. To my surprise, he readily agreed. We met in a quiet cafe, away from curious ears. "Mark," I began, my voice trembling but determined. "I know I have no right to ask this, but I need to say it. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything. For what I did to you, to our family, to Emily. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I know that's asking too much. I just want you to know that I understand the depth of the damage I caused and that I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be a better person." Mark looked at me for a long moment, his eyes revealing a complex mixture of emotions. Finally, he spoke. "Sarah, for a long time I hated you. I hated what you did to us, hated how you destroyed everything we had built. But over time, I realized that this hate was consuming me, preventing me from being the father Emily deserved, the man I wanted to be. I can't say I forgive you completely, not yet, but I'm working on it for me, for Emily, and yes, even for you." His words hit me like lightning, a mixture of relief and gratitude flooding over me. It wasn't total forgiveness, but it was a start, a chance to rebuild something from the ashes of our past. From that day on, our relationship began to change gradually. The exchanges of Emily between our homes became less tense. Occasionally, we even managed to have civilized conversations about our daughter's life, her challenges and achievements. Emily, noticing this change, began to flourish in a way we hadn't seen in years. Her smile became more frequent. Her performance in school improved and she seemed more comfortable in her own skin. Saying our daughter happy, even in separate families, was the greatest reward we could have. The years passed, bringing changes and growth for all of us. Emily graduated from high school with honors and was accepted into a prestigious university. On her graduation day, something happened that I never imagined possible. Mark, his new wife, and I sat side by side in the audience, proudly applauding as our daughter received her diploma. After the ceremony, we gathered to take photos. Emily, radiant in her graduation gown, pulled us together for a group picture. "Come on," she said. "I want a photo with my family." Family, a word I thought I had lost the right to use long ago. But there we were, me, Mark, his wife, and our beautiful Emily, all smiling for the camera, united by the love we felt for this incredible young woman. At that moment, looking at the camera flash, I understood something profound. Family isn't just what is born perfect and remains intact. Sometimes family is what we rebuild from the ruins of our mistakes. It's the forgiveness we offer, the love that persists despite wounds, the ability to grow and change. My journey was far from over. There were still difficult days, moments of doubt and regret. But now I knew that forgiveness, from others and from myself, was possible. That love, in its various forms, could survive even the most violent storms. As we walked to Emily's graduation party, I allowed myself a moment of gratitude. Gratitude for the second chance life had given me, for my daughter's resilience, for Mark's unexpected compassion, and gratitude for the hardest and most valuable lesson I had learned, that our mistakes, no matter how big, don't have to define us forever, that there is always room for growth, for change, for redemption. I looked up at the starry sky on that summer night and made a silent promise, a promise to continue this journey of growth and self-awareness, to never again take for granted the love and trust of others, to be the best version of myself, not just for me, but for all those whose lives I touched. And so, with a heart full of hope and renewed determination, I took another step towards the future, grateful for the chance to write a new chapter in my story, a chapter of healing, forgiveness, and above all, unconditional love.